Hey folks, this is Cindy. Thanks so much for stopping by. Today I am guest designing for Concord 9th. This is their Friday feature for their March of 2018 release, and this release, folks, is just so much fun. Today we're going to be taking a look at the banners and bloom stamp set as well as the ribbon banner die. Now, the ribbon banner die launched last year, October of 2017. It actually coordinated with the Christmas cheer Turnabout stamp set, and I think it's brilliant that Concord 9th is making sure that you can use their dies, this die, all year long. I think it's perfect. So this is the Banners and Bloom stamp set, and I just love the stamp set for so many reasons. First off, I love that you could simply use that larger stamp right there on the right, and you could stamp that on a card panel, color it in, call it a day. You could also use those little filler stamps to kind of build that up, make it so much bigger. That larger stamp is actually in the shape of those ribbons, which is brilliant. You can also use those smaller stamps to fill in around those ribbons, and then of course all of those sentiments, they actually fit within the shape of those ribbons as well. And then you can use that little stamp there to add a little bit more detail to your ribbon if you'd like. This is the ribbon banner die, and I love the simplicity of the shape. Now, you could easily die cut out some cardstock, put it on your card panel, and use these stamps to stamp around this. I chose to do a little bit of simple but creative masking today, but if you didn't want to do that, you could absolutely just die cut this, put it on your panel, call it a day. Now, these stamps within the stamp set, they actually coordinate with the banner. And as you can see here, you could totally stamp that outline on that banner. So you would have a little bit more detail, a little bit more character on that banner, but you certainly don't have to. Okay, so I'm going to get started on my card, and I have a piece of Nano Solar White 80-pound cardstock cut down to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and then I also die cut that banner with the ribbon banner die out of a scrap piece of cardstock, and I'm just adding some temporary adhesive to the back of that, and I'm going to place it right there in the center of my card panel, or as close to the center as I can get it. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. The most important thing is that it's straight as opposed to being centered, because if it is crooked, you're going to notice it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to lightly trace around that whole entire banner. I was simply using that die as a placeholder because I'm not going to use the die as it's intended on my card, but I need to know where the outline of it is so I can place my stamp on there. Now, I do have my stamp on there, and I am using a MISTI stamping tool. You don't have to do that, folks. You could hand stamp all of this, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't mess anything up. Now, I have some Simon Says stamp masking paper, and I had die cut that as well with the banner, and you'll see what I'm going to do here in just a moment. I've picked up that stamp with the door of my MISTI, and for right now I'm going to hold off on stamping that because I'm going to trim down a part of this panel. Now, you could certainly put the whole entire mask over the top of your banner, but I didn't want to do that because I wanted a part of that rose to come up over the top of the banner on the top and over the bottom of the banner on the bottom. But those smaller flowers, I wanted those to look like they were actually back behind the banner. So now that I have my masks in place, I'm going to stamp this, and I'm going to use Hero Arts Intense Black ink because I know that I'm going to be doing Copic coloring. Any Copic safe ink would be fine, but I prefer Hero Arts Intense Black. And then as soon as I had the one on top stamp, and I did double stamp it, I switched it around to the bottom, and now I'm going to stamp that. Okay, I did make sure that I cleaned off that stamp really well before I placed it on my card panel so I didn't transfer any ink. And now I'm just filling in some of those little areas with some of the smaller stamps that are in there. You don't have to do that. It would be fine without it, but I really wanted to make this look a little bit more full. In fact, I'm kind of playing around a little bit with the other stamps in there, but I decided that for the time being that this is enough. However, I do hang on to that cardstock die, the ribbon banner die, because I do end up coming in later and adding a few more images to this. So you could actually hang on to your masking paper if you'd like, but I decided later on to add those, so I'd already gotten rid of them. Now, when I had done my masking initially, I didn't give myself enough room for those roses to hang over, so I do have to come in with my Copic Safe pen and kind of fill those in, but that was no big deal. If it makes you nervous to draw that in, just make sure that when you cut down those masks that you give yourself enough room that your roses will actually fit onto the banner when you stamp them. Now I'm placing that cardstock banner back on the card panel because I'm going to actually use this as a stencil. And I'm going to take a Copic Safe pen again, and I'm going to draw in this banner. The width of the pen that I'm using, it actually matches the thickness of the lines of the stamp. You could maybe go a little bit thicker. You could definitely go thinner, but I wouldn't go too thick because otherwise they're not going to match up and it will look funny when you finish up your card panel. And this is pretty easy. I'm just tracing around it. I am going pretty slow because I don't want my pen to skip. I don't want to make any mistakes because I really don't want to have to start this over. So I am kind of taking it a little easy, but it's actually not too hard to do. So now that I have that done, I am going to get ready to start coloring in my panel. Before I do that, though, I'm going to make sure that I erase my pencil lines. Now, I'm going dark enough with my coloring that it wouldn't matter. However, if you're going to use lighter colors, you certainly want to make sure that you have erased all of those pencil lines. Otherwise, it will show through and you won't be able to erase them later. I'm also going to stamp my sentiments before I start coloring this in. You don't have to do that. You could wait till later. I just figured while I had my Misty sitting there, I might as well do that. And I do make sure that I stamp this several times. This would also look super great heat embossed. You wouldn't have to emboss anything else on the panel, just the sentiment. But I decided to just make sure that it was a nice bold black and call it good. Okay, so now I am going to start coloring this in, and I'm going to start with R22, R24, R27, and R39. Now, these flowers are really small, folks. They're actually surprisingly small. They take up a fairly good amount of space on your card panel, but each one by itself, it's pretty small. You don't need to use 4 separate colors when you color this in. This is just something that I like to do. If you're going to only use 3 colors, I would use the R22, R24, and the R39. I like the R39. I think it adds just the right amount of depth and dimension to my images. But if that is too dark for you, then you could definitely use the R22, R24, and R27, and maybe just go in a tiny, tiny bit with C5 or something to kind of help reinforce the shadow and the dimensions. Now, I'm just mapping this out with my R22, and for the most part, I'm just using thin, fine lines. I am kind of mapping this out a little bit more than what I actually end up doing with that R39 because this is so small. I don't want to eat up all of that white space. I want to preserve as much highlight as I possibly can because I don't want my flower to turn into a blob. And it's the differences between the highlights and the shadows that really make all the difference on your finished image. So I am trying to keep that in mind. In some cases with this R39, I'm holding my marker straight up and down, and I'm just simply adding a line in there. I'm also making sure that on some of those petals that are next so close to another petal that I'm not taking that shadow, that R39, up to the edge on both of them. I'm kind of leaving a little bit of highlight there between the two of them so you can tell the difference as I finish this off. I did forget to color in a couple of those petals with the R22, and I always go back and add my lightest before I go to my darkest, primarily because I want that lighter color to saturate the cardstock before I bring in a darker one. That is really the key to getting your Copics to blend. You want the cardstock saturated. And lighter colored Copics have more colorless blender in them, and that is really what helps get things to blend. So because I forgot those two petals, I went back in with my R22, then to the R39. Now I'm working back out to my lightest color, which is the next one would be the R27. And then I'm just keeping it really conservative. I'm just being as careful as I possibly can so I don't eat up all that white space. Now I have the R24, and again, I'm being really careful. In most of these petals, I am just barely stretching it out. Really, at the end of the day, on some of these, I'm just using each lighter color to kind of knock back some of that R39 so it's not quite so stark or so dark that it looks funny. Now I have the R22. I actually end up going back over this with the R22 again because I started to run out of ink in this marker. And I wasn't quite getting the blend that I wanted. It looked just fine. It was definitely fine, but I wanted it to have just a wee bit more of a smoother blend. So I end up refilling my R22 and going back over it again. The more ink that you have in your markers, the smoother the blend you're going to get as well. So that's always something to keep in mind. Now I felt like I definitely had more than enough highlight after I went in with the R22. So now I'm just bringing in the R24 and I'm kind of stretching out those midtones just a tiny bit more because I can. Now I'm bringing in the C5 and I'm just going in those little nooks and crannies. You don't have to do that. You could totally skip this and it would be just fine. This is just something that I like to do to kind of help reinforce those. But if you don't have a C5, you could definitely go back in with your R39, or you could just skip this altogether. It really doesn't matter if you do this or not. So I am going to go just a little bit more with the R24 because I wanted just a little bit more mid in there. And then I'm going to bring in that R22 and go back over it one more time, and we're going to call it good on these. I don't show you how I color in the other one because it was exactly like this one. But again, these went together really, really fast. So while I was doing this card panel, I was thinking about the different mediums you could use with this stamp set. Watercolors would be awesome. A very loose watercolor with maybe a cream colored watercolored paper with pastels for your watercolors on the flowers. Colored pencils would also be gorgeous. You could do this on black cardstock, stamp it in white pigment ink, do it on black cardstock with colored pencils. That would be stunning. I just think that there's so many different approaches you could take with a stamp set and it would look amazing. Okay, so now I'm going to start coloring in this other flower here, and I'm so sorry you can't see what colors I was using. Not paying attention when I held those up there. So I'm going to be using the BG23, BG45, BG49, and a BG75. You could absolutely skip the BG75. I just wanted to check it out. I'm actually kind of limited on the amount of blue greens I own, surprisingly enough. So I just kind of wanted to throw that in there and see if it would work out. It does. However, again, with an image this small, you don't really need it. I think the BG23, 45, and 49 would be sufficient, but it turned out all right. So I mapped that out with the BG23, and then I'm bringing in the BG75. This BG75 is pretty dark. There isn't a whole lot of a difference between the BG49 and the BG75 other than it has, the BG75 has a little bit more green in it than the BG49. The BG49 kind of lends more towards the blue end of blue-green, where the BG75 is more of a green out of the blue-green end. So I'm just going to blend this out with the BG49 that go in with the BG45. Now, something to note between the BG49 and 45. The BG49, while it has more blue in it than the BG75, the BG45 has more blue in it yet. So because they're 4 shades apart, 4 numbers apart, there's quite a bit of a difference between the two of them, but they actually blend together just fine. And certainly use whatever you have on hand to make it work. So on this one, I'm just doing very light flicking motions. As I go up from the center of the petal towards the tip of the petal, I am making sure that I follow the shape of it. So when everything is colored in, it actually looks like the flower will actually look like it's cupped, like those petals are coming up and out. And that's definitely the look you want to go for, because you're trying to make this look three-dimensional. Okay, so I'm going to speed this up, and I just keep going back and forth on this until I get it where I want it. I go from the BG23 back out to the darkest a little bit, and then I kind of come in with my BG45, which is my mid-tone, and I add a little bit more mid to it. Occasionally I do come in with the BG49 and stretch those darker shadow colors out just a wee bit more, and then once I get it where I want it, I move on. Okay, so now I'm going to color in that flower right above the blue, green, and the red one. I don't show you because it's off camera again, but I'm using the Y11, Y13, and the Y38. Now, these don't sound like they would work together very well, but they actually do. I think they work really well together. So again, I map it out with the Y11, although on an image this small, you wouldn't need to map it out. You could definitely go in with your darkest color right away. In this case, I'm using the Y38. Now, yellows are tricky. They're really hard to get that right balance between lights and shadows, but I think for smaller images, this color combination works really well. Plus, there's no need to put a whole lot of time and effort into something this small. Then once I was done with the Y38, I took my Y13 and I stretched that out just a tiny, tiny bit. And then I'm going back in with the Y11 and I'm going to call it good. So now I'm going to color in the leaves, and off camera, I actually colored in those little tiny flowers with the blue greens. Now, had I been using my Smarticles, I would have actually colored that in with yellow, because that would have really helped those stand out, like pop up against the background a little bit more, but it's fine. We're going to move on. All right, so I have G12, G14, G17, and G29, and I'm simply using this color combination because it's been out on my desk. I've been using it a ton lately. This is a really great green color combination, but you could use anything you like. Yellow greens would also be fabulous if you wanted to do that, but this is what I'm going to do today. So I mapped it out with the G12. Actually, I didn't even map it out. Just kidding. I actually colored in all of the leaves with the G12. These are so small, there's nothing to really map out. And I want to make sure that I get a really good blend on these. So I just colored in the whole thing with the G12. I brought in that G29 just a tiny bit, and I'm going to skip that G17. I'm going to bring in the G14 to blend out that G29 pretty well. And then I'm going to go back over the top of that with the G12, and I'm going to call it good. I color in all of the leaves like this. There is no reason to do anything fancy because they're so itty bitty. You wouldn't even notice all of that detail anyway. I do end up coming back in with the G12 again and making sure that the shadows on this aren't too stark. While I want it to look like the leaves have a little bit of shadow, I don't want them to stick out like sore thumbs either. So I colored in all of the leaves. I colored in all of the other flowers exactly like I did the first ones. I put that cardstock banner back on there, and I stamped some of the standalone leaves from the stamp set on there because I wanted to fill in that banner a little bit more, and I colored them in exactly the same as the other ones. I also took that little accent for the banners and I stamped those on there as well to kind of help fill things in a little bit so that banner didn't look so stark and it kind of blended in a little bit better with everything else going on here. Now I'm going to add a drop shadow to this. You could absolutely skip this, folks. You could mount this on a card panel and call it good, but I love me a good drop shadow. So I'm going to add this, and plus I really want it to make it look like everything is popping up off this card panel, because I'm not going to be doing a whole lot more to it once I'm done with this. I am mapping out my shadows with the C3, Before I go any darker, now I am going to be using C00, C1, C3, and C5. You could do a C1. It's a little too hard to see when you map them out. So I always start with a C5 or C3, I'm sorry, because I know that I'm going to be going over this several times, getting lighter and lighter to get a good blend. Once I have everything mapped out the way I want it, I am bringing in the C5. And for now, I am not doing any shadows on the inside of that banner. I am saving that for last simply because that's how I do it. I just need to keep it separated in my mind. I don't need to worry about the inside of that banner just yet. It will look like a cohesive part of the scene when I'm done, but right now I don't need to worry about it. Once I had the C5 in there, I go back to the C3 and I start blending it out. When I added that C5, it was just with the very tip of my marker. I don't want my lines to be too thick or too fat because I don't want too much shadow, and it saves me a little bit of blending later. Now, as I start getting lighter, now that I'm at the C1 after the C3, I start to hold my marker a little bit more tilted to the side so I can start stretching those lines out and making them a little bit fatter. What I always go for with my drop shadow is I really love it when it fades out to a perfect white. In some cases, you can leave harsher lines, and that's just fine. It looks just fine. I just prefer a much smoother blend, and this definitely helps me achieve that. Now I'm at the C00. Technically, this would be my lightest color. And once I get done with this, I'm actually going to let these Copics dry back for a second. And I'm going to take a look at the lines, the edges of my blending. And if there's anything too harsh, then I come in with my colorless blender and I just give it a good swipe. The whole thing, the whole drop shadow, I just give it a good swipe. And that generally blends everything out, knocks everything back, but I still have a really nice drop shadow. So now that I have the drop shadow done on the outside, I'm going to go in and I'm going to work on the inside of that banner. And I want the edges of this to look like they are curling, so it looks dimensional. So I started with that the C3 again, and I just added my mapping where I wanted it to, leaving a highlight on the edges of that banner. You don't want to take it all the way up to the edge of the banner. By leaving that really thin highlight, it helps give the eye the illusion that this banner really curls back, and that's perfect. That's exactly what you want. I did go in with the C5 around those roses. I didn't do that along the edges of the banners because I felt like that would be too dark, but you could definitely add some of that darker shadowing around the roses, and it's just perfect. I'm doing the same thing with this blend as I did with the drop shadow on the outside. I went C3, C5, back to the C3, C1, C00, and just a tiny, tiny bit with my colorless blender to make sure that everything blended out exactly how I wanted it to. So now that all of my coloring is done, I have a lemon yellow Copic Spica pen, and I'm just adding little dots to the inside of those blue-green flowers. At the end of the day, you don't really notice them. You could actually just do maybe some Nuvo crystal drops on the inside of that and call it good. But I thought it looked fun. I was going to try the black Spica on those little flowers right there, but then I decided to bring in a black jelly roll pen. I like this pen. It's a little dimensional and it adds just a little bit more depth and character to the card panel, I think. And I'm going straight down. I look to see that ink has pooled just a tiny bit, and then I come straight back up, and I do this with all of the flowers. I think it looks awesome. That little bit of texture on a card can make a huge difference. I do take the clear jelly roll pen and I go on the inside of the blue-green flowers for a little bit more texture and dimension yet. And then I also do the same thing with those little tiny blue-green flowers. You could skip those. They're so little you probably wouldn't even notice them anyway. So no card of mine is complete without all the glitter. So I have a Nuvo clear glitter glass pen, and I made sure that I had actually quite a bit of this on my bristles before I started, and I'm just going over the highlights on all of the images but the leaves. I skipped the leaves because I wanted a little bit of contrast between the flowers, the gel pen, and the leaves, but I give it a really solid coating in that glitter gloss. Once I was done with that, I added some more of that black jelly roll pen to add some dots around my image. I mounted it on an A2 top folding note card and called it good. This stamp set was so much fun, and I cannot wait till next week when I have more of the Concord 9th March 2018 release to share with you. It is truly a blast. All right, I have more details and links over on my blog, as well as some links to a couple of other lovely, lovely girls that are sharing some Concord 9th inspiration with you. I hope you enjoyed my cards today. If you did, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and tap that bell next to the subscribe button so you can receive all future notifications. Thanks again so much for stopping by. Until next time.